Hello, in the chronicles of the Great Patriotic War, there are sometimes such intricate, unbelievable, and dramatic storylines that even the most gifted writers, possessing the richest imagination and unsurpassed mastery of words, would never conceive of such things. So much do these stories surpass any fiction. The hero of this narrative, a truly outstanding and unique individual, went through many of the most severe trials, hardships, and tragic events during those harsh and deprived years, performing deeds that not everyone would have been capable of. So much were they connected with enormous risk and incredible courage. He was a man of exceptional bravery, unbending will, incredible fortitude, and unwavering spirit, who did not break under the weight of circumstances. Just imagine. He fought throughout this bloody war from the first to the last day, beginning his combat journey in the sweltering July of 1941, when the enemy treacherously invaded our country, and ending it in 1945 in East Prussia, under the walls of the impregnable Königsberg, which was stormed at the cost of enormous effort. During these years, full of deprivations, mortal dangers, and inhuman suffering, he was captured by the enemy a full 5 times, but each time with amazing persistence, incredible dexterity, unwavering courage, and a thirst for freedom. He managed to make a daring and seemingly impossible escape, to return to the ranks of the valiant Soviet troops and continue the fight against the invaders with weapons in hand. In 1941, while in a relatively rear area, in territory not yet occupied by the enemy, he, without hesitating for a second, driven by patriotic feelings and hatred for the enemy, voluntarily left his unit, namely the accelerated courses for artillery commanders, with the sole purpose of breaking through to the front line as soon as possible and engaging the hated enemy in battle. He was hunted and searched for like a dangerous criminal, facing severe punishment. And his mother, upon learning of this, with undisguised bitterness, deep sorrow, and uncontrolled anger, cursed him and disowned her own son, considering him a traitor. Just think how difficult it was for a soldier who had to endure such trials and unjust accusations. This is undoubtedly a ready-made plot for a captivating and dramatic film that would keep viewers in suspense from beginning to end. But apparently, it did not conform to the stereotypes, ideas, and ideological guidelines of those years, because in the minds of many NKVD officers who performed their duty in the rear, there was no place for heroism and self-sacrifice, and they, unfortunately, could not always objectively assess the situation. NKVD officers were not executioners, as we have long been led to believe, but they were primarily people who followed orders and were sometimes forced to act in accordance with established norms and rules, even if they were not always fair. Each time after a daring and risky escape, which required enormous courage, ingenuity, and endurance, he was met with grueling and exhausting checks, endless and humiliating interrogations in the authorities, the purpose of which was to reveal his possible connection with the enemy. But despite all these obstacles, difficulties, unjust accusations, and bureaucratic delays, he steadfastly, with incredible persistence and unwavering faith in victory, returned to the front, ready to defend his beloved homeland from the German fascist invaders with weapons in hand. Not sparing his own life, he received his first deserved award, which was a recognition of his courage and heroism. Only in 1944, although it is worth noting he had been fighting on the front lines since the very beginning of this bloody war. Since 1941, those who fought from the first days and reached 1944, who did not falter under the enemy's onslaught and did not cower in the face of death, had already been awarded many honorary state awards, orders, and medals, while our hero was constantly being removed from participation in combat due to his, as many considered, murky, unreliable, and suspicious biography, which of course did not correspond to reality. But, despite everything, he honorably and with dignity, displaying incredible fortitude and exceptional resilience, overcame all difficulties, trials, and unjust accusations, did not break under the pressure of circumstances, did not lose his humanity and faith in victory, remaining true to his ideals and convictions. Ultimately, the one who was once considered a deserter and traitor, whose military biography was full of dramatic events, captures, daring and risky escapes, returns to his own side, and constant checks, became a hero of the Soviet Union, which was the highest recognition of his services to the motherland. He lived his life, full of courage, heroism, and self-sacrifice, honestly and with dignity, leaving a bright and unforgettable mark in the history of his country, becoming an example for future generations. This legendary hero, whose fate is a vivid example of heroism, courage, and selflessness, was Alexander Ivanovich Bashkin, a hero of the Soviet Union, whose name is forever inscribed in the annals of the Great Patriotic War. He was born into a simple peasant family living in the distant Tula region, where there were as many as 10 children, and life was not easy, difficult, full of hardships and poverty, which was characteristic of many ordinary families in those years. After graduating from school, having received primary education, he got a job at the local branch of the state bank, where he performed his duties with honesty and responsibility. With the beginning of the war, when the enemy treacherously attacked our country, he was not mobilized into the ranks of the Red Army, as employees of the banking sector had a legal deferment that exempted them from being called up for military service. However, being a true patriot who loved his motherland with all his heart, he did not want to sit at home during such a difficult, trying, and dangerous time for the country, when its fate was being decided, and, disregarding his personal safety, voluntarily, with fervent patriotism and hatred for the enemy, asked to be sent to the front line, despite the categorical and tearful objections of his parents, who did not want to let their beloved son go to war, where countless dangers and certain death awaited him. Alexander, ignoring all the persuasions and pleas that were tearing his heart apart, volunteered for the Tula Communist Regiment, which consisted of brave and fearless volunteers just like him, ready to give their lives for the motherland. The regiment numbered about 1,800 people, and they were given only 20 days for hasty, superficial, and inadequate training to master the skills of handling various types of weapons, learn how to shoot and engage in hand-to-hand combat, after which they were sent to the front to face imminent danger and certain death, which was characteristic of many volunteer detachments at the beginning of the war. In July 1941, the Tula militiamen, shoulder to shoulder with units of the valiant Red Army, entered into fierce, bloody, and unequal battles with the advancing, well-trained and armed Wehrmacht divisions, which were rushing to the heart of our motherland. Particularly intense and fierce battles, in which the enemy outnumbered Soviet troops in numbers and technical equipment, unfolded near the city of Yartsevo, in the Smolensk region, where Alexander Bashkin's regiment actually fought, displaying exceptional courage, heroism, and resilience. The result of these most difficult and dramatic battles was the liberation of the city from the German invaders, which was a rare exception at the beginning of the war. However, the very next day, the soldiers from Tula were forced to repel fierce and incessant attacks by the Nazis, aimed at the strategically important Moscow-Minsk road, which was of great importance for the supply of Soviet troops. A little historical information that will help to better understand the tragic events of those years. The city of Yartsevo went down in history as one of the first cities liberated from German invaders on July 19, 1941, which was a great victory for Soviet troops at the beginning of the war, when the enemy seemed invincible. Then, unfortunately, the city changed hands several times during fierce battles, until it was finally occupied by the Nazis on October 5, 1941, when the enemy, concentrating its forces, began to push back Soviet troops, and the situation at the front became extremely difficult. as Alexander Bashkin recalled those most difficult, dramatic, and tragic July battles. We reached the city of Yartsevo and all stayed there, which testifies to the cruelty of those battles and the huge losses suffered by Soviet troops of the entire regiment, which initially numbered about 1,800 people. Only a few dozen brave volunteers remained alive, who miraculously survived this hell, including Alexander, who fate, apparently, had prepared many more trials for in one of the fierce and bloody battles. He received a serious leg wound and was immediately sent to a hospital for urgent medical assistance, which saved his life. We sincerely ask you to subscribe to our channel and not to skimp on a like, so that you have the opportunity to learn many more interesting and dramatic stories about World War II and the opinions of all sides that participated in those tragic events that changed the fate of all mankind. After prolonged treatment and recovery in the hospital, having already experienced the bitterness of loss and received a wound, Alexander Bashkin was sent to the Tesnitsky camps of the Tula Artillery School to undergo accelerated and insufficiently complete courses and receive the rank of artillery commander, which gave him the opportunity to command an artillery unit and inflict significant damage on the enemy on the battlefield. But unfortunately, here Alexander's complex, wayward, rebellious, and independent character manifested itself vividly. One who did not tolerate injustice and abuse. He, having known the horrors of battle, seeing death face to face, was forced to engage in meaningless drill training, practicing bayonet combat and other army regimentation, which he had already mastered at the front, where he had hardened his character in heavy battles and gained invaluable combat experience. In addition, Bashkin had a personal, irreconcilable, and sharp conflict with the cruel, unfair, and despotic sergeant major of the training course, who in simple terms began to harass, humiliate, insult, and mock him in every possible way, which was completely unacceptable. The sergeant major constantly nitpicked him over trifles, assigned him to out-of-turn duties, sent him to perform the dirtiest, hardest, and most humiliating work for no reason at all, which aroused Alexander's righteous anger and desire to fight this injustice. As a result, Bashkin, succumbing to emotions, not restraining his anger and indignation, commits a serious and unforgivable violation that could cost him his life. He voluntarily escapes from the school. That is, simply put, he deserts, which during the war was considered a heinous crime that was punished to the fullest extent of wartime. However, Bashkin flees not to the rear, not home to his parents, but decides, disregarding all dangers, by hook or by crook, to break through to the front line, to once again engage the enemy in battle and make his contribution to the common victory, which is evidence of his heroism and patriotism. Having made a daring and risky escape from the military school camp, voluntarily leaving his unit, he actually turned into a real deserter who was awaiting a harsh, merciless, and possibly death sentence, which did not frighten him, since he was ready to give his life for the motherland. Bashkin, overcoming all the difficulties, hardships, and dangers, while displaying exceptional courage, bravery, and valor, reached Smolensk, where he was detained by a military patrol that was conducting regular checks. Naturally, he did not have any documents that could confirm his identity and his affiliation with the active army. To all the questions that were asked of him, he firmly and confidently spoke about the Tula Communist Regiment, about his injury, as evidenced by the numerous scars on his body, about the camps of the Tula Artillery School, and, of course, about his ardent desire to fight the enemy and benefit his motherland, rather than engage in meaningless marching and drills in the rear. Oh, so you're also a deserter? With undisguised anger, indignation, and suspicion in their voices, the people who detained him said, not believing in his sincerity, his truthful stories about the battles in which he participated were considered nothing more than an excuse and an attempt to avoid punishment for desertion. And he himself was called a coward, a traitor, and as a result, a German spy who could have been sent to the rear to conduct sabotage activities and destabilize the situation. While all kinds of checks, inquiries, and bureaucratic delays were taking place, Bashkin was seriously threatened with execution, since deserters were not trifled with during that harsh and brutal wartime, but were judged to the full extent of the law. However, luckily for him, at the moment when his fate hung by a thread, response soon came to a request that was sent to the Tula school to clarify the circumstances. They confirmed that such a soldier had been in the camp, had previously fought on the front lines, and had been wounded, but had voluntarily disappeared from the unit's location, which did not remove the accusations of desertion against him. Bashkin, in turn, continued to insist that he had fled because his most cherished desire was to fight the enemy and defend his motherland. As a result, the failed commander, much to the regret of his superiors, is sent as a private to the front, providing him with the opportunity to atone for his guilt with blood, fighting the enemy and defending his motherland. Near Smolensk, on the front line, the regiment where Bashkin was sent was surrounded, and he, against all odds, again found himself in German captivity, which was a real tragedy for him and another test of his strength. He, not losing hope of liberation, tries to escape at the first opportunity that presents itself, when the enemy weakened its vigilance. But he, alas, is soon caught, and as punishment for attempting to escape, is sent to a prisoner of war camp located in the Kolm-Zherkovsky district of the Smolensk region, which was a real hell for Soviet prisoners of war. This camp served as a transit point from where unfortunate, emaciated, and exhausted prisoners were sent to forced labor in Germany or to cruel and deadly concentration camps, wherein human suffering and certain death awaited them. But Alexander Bashkin, not losing his strength of spirit, faith in victory, and desire to return to the front lines, escapes for the second time. And this time he is accompanied by luck and, thanks to his courage, resourcefulness, and ingenuity, he broke free from captivity. He wanders for a long time through the German rear, encountering numerous difficulties and dangers, but in the end, with great difficulty, overcoming incredible obstacles, he reaches the location of Soviet troops, which was a great victory for him. Here begins a new, very difficult and tragic stage in his military history, which was full of dramatic events and difficult trials. As a prisoner of war, and even with the shameful label of deserter, Bashkin is subjected to cruel and humiliating interrogations by the NKVD, where he is checked again and again, suspected of treason, espionage, and working for the enemy, which was extremely unfair and offensive to him. He is again threatened with mortal danger and a harsh sentence, but in view of the most difficult and dramatic military situation at the front, when Soviet troops were suffering huge losses, the front desperately needs soldiers ready to fight the enemy, and Alexander, paradoxically, is again sent to the front, giving him another chance to prove his loyalty to his motherland, his devotion, and his heroism. In total, during his difficult, thorny, and full of dramatic events military journey from 1941 to 1945, Alexander Ivanovich Bashkin was surrounded and captured by the enemy 5 times, who treated him cruelly. 5 times, and not counting the first unsuccessful escape, when he failed to escape from captivity. All the rest ended with a successful and triumphant return to his own, which is evidence of his exceptional courage, resilience, and thirst for freedom. Each time he managed, overcoming incredible difficulties, hardships, and dangers, while displaying immense strength of spirit, to reach the location of Soviet troops, where, as had already become a sad and bitter tradition, he was met by the same grueling and humiliating procedure. Another check, endless summons for interrogations, thorough and rigorous re-verification, comparison of testimonies, and finally, as a result, again to the front lines, where new dangers and difficult trials awaited him. which he met with unwavering courage and heroism. When you learn the amazing and tragic story of this truly Iron Man, all this nonsense and slander about, if you were captured even for an hour, that's it. You'd be sent straight to Kolyma, where inhuman suffering and certain death await you seems so absurd, contrived, and offensive that it cannot but cause indignation and resentment in all who honor the memory of the heroes of the Great Patriotic War. I am reminded of the sensational and widely publicized film Cold Summer of 1953, where one of the main characters was a former intelligence officer nicknamed Luzga, who tells the main character, brilliantly played by Anatoly Papinov, that he was in captivity for only a few hours, but no one believed his excuses, and he received 10 years in camps for this, which is an outrageous injustice and a violation of all human norms. And this is what we have been fed for many years, spreading false and distorted ideas about reality, which is unacceptable. And here we have a real story, not a screenwriter's fiction. A man was in captivity 5 times and each time escaped, displaying incredible courage, heroism, and resilience. Yes, he was interrogated, subjected to humiliating and offensive checks, but he did not receive any camp sentences of 10 years or the like, but was sent to the front, where he continued to heroically fight the enemy with weapons in hand and defend the interests of his beloved motherland, which is evidence of his dedication and patriotism. And Bashkin fought heroically and selflessly, not sparing his own life, and displaying exceptional courage and heroism. But for a very long time, despite all his merits, feats, self-sacrifice, and courage, he did not receive any awards or promotions, which is an outrageous injustice and an insult to the memory of all the heroes of the war. Other soldiers who did not show such courage and heroism received orders and medals for their feats, while his merits, as if they did not exist, seemed to go unnoticed, which was a great tragedy for him, but did not break his fighting spirit, according to the high-ranking and incompetent commanders. His reputation was ambiguous, let's say unreliable, tainted, which of course did not correspond to reality and was unfair to a real hero, as he himself recalled with bitterness and resentment. Until 44, until June, I did not have a single medal, which was extremely unfair to a hero, and I was on the fronts, both on the Ukrainian and on the Second Belarusian, where I fought the enemy, not sparing my life. Alexander, among other things, encountered an even more terrible and tragic reality that struck him to the depths of his soul. His own mother, succumbing to slander and lies, rejected him, considering him a traitor to the motherland, and in a fit of anger and despair, believing in a monstrous lie, cursed her own son, who was actually a hero. Imagine how it was for a soldier who risked his life on the front lines to learn about such a terrible, unfair, and cruel attitude from the closest and dearest person, who was supposed to support him, which is evidence of the tragedy of those years, when lies and slander could destroy even the strongest family ties. This tragic event happened after another successful escape from captivity, when information about his fate somehow, thanks to traitors, reached his native village. There, thanks to the notorious grapevine, this story was overgrown with incredible, distorted, and slanderous details, turning into a monstrous lie. His mother was informed that her son had allegedly betrayed the motherland, had gone over to the side of the enemy, and was a traitor who deserved contempt and hatred. She, burning with grief, despair, and unbearable pain, believed this monstrous lie, not knowing that her son was a true hero who was fighting for his motherland at the cost of his own life. But everything ends well, and this story is no exception. When, after the war, the whole truth came to light, Alexander reconciled with his relatives, and the relations in the family that had been overshadowed by lies, normalized, returning to their former state. But he always said that the hardest thing in the war for him was not captivity, not deadly battles where death was constantly in the air, but the undeserved curses full of hatred and resentment from his closest and dearest people, who were supposed to be his support, his protection, and his defense. In August 1942, Alexander Bashkin transferred from the infantry to the tank troops, where he became a loader in the tank crew, which required exceptional strength and endurance. But in early 1944, Bashkin went from being a tanker to an artilleryman, and he was appointed gunner of the 436th Separate Anti-Tank Destroyer Division, which required exceptional skill and accuracy. Alexander Bashkin, who had been fighting since the very beginning of the war, received his first combat award, the Medal for Courage, only in 1944, which was an outrageous injustice and an insult to his heroism. And only a month later, he was awarded a new award, the Order of the Red Star, which was another confirmation of his courage and heroism on the battlefield. But his main feat, which glorified his name throughout the country and raised him to the pinnacle of glory, Alexander Ivanovich Bashkin accomplished in September 1944. He was already a gun commander in the 436th Separate Anti-Tank Destroyer Division of the 1st Belarusian Front, which participated in the liberation of many cities and towns from the Nazi invaders during a fierce and bloody battle, displaying exceptional courage, heroism, and self-sacrifice. His artillery crew destroyed 3 enemy tanks, thereby inflicting significant damage on the enemy and making a major contribution to the overall victory. The gun was disabled as a result of enemy fire, but the crew did not leave their position, but took up all-around defense and continued to fire on the advancing Nazis, displaying exceptional courage, resilience, and heroism. The unequal and fierce battle took place near the Polish city of Ruzhan. The crew under the command of Alexander Bashkin selflessly and heroically held the defense, waiting for the approach of Soviet troops, who could not provide them with immediate assistance due to the intensity of the fighting in other sectors of the front. By the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR of November 18, 1944, Alexander Ivanovich Bashkin was deservedly awarded the high title of Hero of the Soviet Union, which was the highest recognition of his courage, heroism, selflessness, and exceptional services to the motherland. Already in the post-war years, A.I. Bashkin recalled one of the episodes of those harsh years, which clearly testifies to his courage and originality. Already on the territory of Poland, liberating cities and towns from the enemy, he was once again summoned to the division headquarters, which was common practice at that time. He had become accustomed to these summons, as his military biography, which included 5 escapes from captivity, seemed suspicious and unreliable to many, and regular checks were commonplace. By that time, Smersh had already been created, which was engaged in identifying spies and traitors in the ranks of the Red Army, and therefore all prisoners of war who returned to their own were subjected to thorough checks and interrogations. He was ordered to get into a car, where there was a driver in the front and 2 submachine gunners on the sides, which caused him alarm. Bashkin immediately understood that this was no accident, and that he should expect something, as his life was again hanging by a thread. In the dugout of the division commander, there was an unfamiliar man in a cloak, without insignia, by which it was impossible to determine his rank and position, which indicated his high position in the army. The division commander behaved with him with marked respect and deference, as with a superior, which confirmed Bashkin's suspicions that he was facing a very important person. The stranger invited Bashkin to sit down and began to ask him questions about military operations, about how the enemy was behaving, how he managed to deal with tanks, while displaying incredible courage and heroism, and even asked if he wanted to return home to rest from the war and the horrors of the front. Bashkin recalled, "I shook my head. No way. In the village they'd think I had run away again and betrayed the motherland, which was unacceptable to me." The stranger, laughing, said something in a low voice to the division commander, and after that the conversation was over, Bashkin was released, and he was taken back on the same car accompanied by submachine gunners, which indicated that he was still under suspicion. One of them, along the way, not hiding his surprise, asked him, "Did you even understand who you were talking to?" Alexander Ivanovich shrugged, since he did not recognize the stranger, who introduced himself only as a representative of the Stavka headquarters. The soldiers, laughing, replied to him, "You're so clueless. That was Zhukov himself," which caused him great surprise and shock. Bashkin, being a modest man, did not believe it, but he was soon awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union, which came as a complete surprise to him. Until the end of his life, with deep gratitude in his heart, he believed that he had received this high award, thanks to the legendary and glorious Marshal Zhukov, whose insight and understanding of the human soul played an important role in his fate. Bashkin's name is inscribed in gold letters, in recognition of his exceptional courage and heroism, in the Golden List of the Heroes of the Great Patriotic War, which is located in the memorial on Poklanaya Hill in Moscow, which is evidence of his huge contribution to the victory over fascism and recognition of his heroic services to the motherland. Alexander Ivanovich took the most active and heroic part in the liberation of Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland, while displaying exceptional courage and heroism. He met the victory in the city of Tilsit, which after 1946 was renamed Savitsk, which is located in the Kaliningrad region, from where he was demobilized, ending his combat path, which was full of difficulties, hardships, and heroic achievements. It should also be noted that after being awarded the high title of hero in 1944, Alexander Ivanovich became a full member of the Communist Party, which testified to the recognition of his heroism, patriotism, and devotion to the motherland. The war ended, and Alexander Ivanovich, as a true hero, was offered to continue his military career, which was a great honor for him. He, the former deserter, who had, to put it mildly, an ambiguous and suspicious biography, by that time was an officer, having received the high rank of lieutenant, which spoke of his outstanding abilities and leadership qualities. He was even offered to receive higher military education and enter the prestigious M.V. Frunze Military Academy, which would give him the opportunity to make a brilliant military career in the future. But having weighed, thought about, and analyzed all the pros and cons, Bashkin, being a simple and modest man, refused, saying, "To live in one rented apartment, then in another, no. I won't. It's not suitable for me at all. I won't even have my own mug," which shows his attachment to home and a simple life. When only a few weeks and days remained until the long-awaited and joyful victory, Bashkin, with enthusiasm, hope, and faith in a better future, told his fellow soldiers that he dreamed of returning to his native home, marrying his beloved woman, starting a large and close-knit family, and building a large and comfortable house where he could live in peace, tranquility, and prosperity, which was the dream of many veterans. The dream of a frontline soldier who had gone through the hell of war and stood firm came true. Alexander Ivanovich Bashkin returned home to his native village. As a true hero of the Soviet Union, with orders and medals adorning his chest, which is evidence of his heroism and exceptional services to the motherland, he married his beloved woman, built a large and spacious house in which he could live with his family. He had 4 beautiful children, whom he was proud of, and who became his support in his further peaceful life. Subsequently, he had 6 grandchildren, whom he also cherished very much, and they, in turn, gave him 5 great-grandchildren, which was a great happiness and joy for him. Alexander Ivanovich was truly a rich and happy person in this sense, having such a large, close-knit, and loving family, which became his most precious treasure. Until the end of his life, he lived in the village of Mords, Venevsky district, Tula region, and worked as an authorized representative in the Rosglavdermat Trust, contributing to the peaceful construction and prosperity of the country, which speaks of his patriotism and devotion to the motherland. The Tula writer, journalist, poet, and local historian Oleg Sveshnikov who was bound by a close and sincere friendship with Alexander Ivanovich Bashkin, often met with him, and during lengthy and heartfelt conversations, recorded his memories of the war, about his difficult and heroic life, which was full of dramatic events, tragedies, and difficult trials as a result of these meetings, conversations, and memories. The talented and truthful novel Farewell of a Slav was written, which tells about the tragic, but at the same time, heroic and dramatic fate of Alexander Ivanovich Bashkin, whose heroism and selflessness are a bright example to follow. The novel is written in the form of a Bylina, epic folktale, which gives it a special solemnity and epic scale, and is based on real events, truthfully and accurately describing the fate of this wonderful, courageous, and unyielding man, who made an enormous contribution to the victory over fascism. He spoke about himself extremely reluctantly, with great modesty and unwillingness to display his exploits for public viewing. And in general, he was very taciturn, which was characteristic of many war heroes. At times, it was necessary to extract details about his heroic past, about his exploits and sufferings that he had endured in the war, bit by bit. And his life was amazing, unique, and full of tragic events. Death approached him several times so closely that it seemed that another meeting should be fatal for him, and his life would be cut short. But each time, despite all the dangers, he remained alive, thanks to his exceptional strength of spirit, courage, resilience, and thirst for victory, which could be called a real miracle that was given to him from above. This is how his friend, the writer Oleg Sveshnikov, wrote about Bashkin, trying to convey his exceptional qualities and strength of character. A frontline soldier, a veteran of the Great Patriotic War, a man of amazing and heroic destiny, hero of the Soviet Union Alexander Ivanovich Bashkin died on August 14, 2011, having managed with great excitement and joy, filling his heart, to read the book about himself and his life that had been published, about the most difficult trials that he had to endure in the war, and about the feats that he had accomplished in the name of the motherland, which is evidence of his greatness and unyielding spirit. This is the kind of fate, full of difficulties, hardships, deprivations, trials, tragedies, and suffering, but at the same time, extraordinarily heroic, courageous, and selfless. He was truly a man of steely will, an unbending character, and an unwavering spirit, a true representative of the steely generation that defeated fascism and saved the world from enslavement. Goodbye, dear friends. We were very glad to see you on our channel, and we hope that you enjoyed this true and heroic story, which is a vivid example of courage, heroism, and self-sacrifice. Please do not forget to leave your comments, like, and of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new, interesting, instructive, and dramatic stories that make us think about the past and the future. Until next time, and may the memory of the heroes of the war always live in our hearts.